This is where it gets interesting. So up till now, it's been pretty much straight, just one connector, one pin. Everything's been pretty straightforward. But from here on out, we are going to be doing both ends at the same time, numbering both ends. We're going to jacket both of them with shrink tube. And in some places, like little, you'll be bundling together the individual circuits that are running out of different sensors and stuff like that, just to keep things tidy and help organize stuff when you start shrink tubing everything else together. The other thing that you'll see here is I have this board where I have this original harness all laid out here so that I can use it as a skeleton guide for the lengths of the wire. I also have kept track of like the connector ends and stuff like that in the cases where I've depinned the plastic housings off of them. So, there's a method to the madness here, but basically you should create one of these for yourself as a board essentially that has the harness laid out so that when you create your new harness, the lengths are the same or at least a little bit longer. So that's the first step there. We'll get started on making new branches. I like to start with, number one wire and using that first wire and whatever other ones are associated with its circuit or its sensor, and then moving on to the next one. So then 3 and then 4 and 5 and 6 and stuff like that. So that's how I would go ahead and run that. And once we get through all the way to the end, then you'll start shrink tubing, bundling further, and then at the very end terminating those wires. Okay, so here's the technique. You get some spools of wire, and I use 18 gauge. 18 gauge. There's a automotive engine bay standard. The name's escaping me now. I'll put it in the comments or the description or whatever. But I'll link to the actual wires where I get it and all that. But basically, this is rated for engine bay use for oil, gas, temperature, exposure, all that stuff. So I get this, and I use the crimpers that you can get on Amazon or whatever. I have a nice Paladin tool one that came with really good dies, and then I have this cheapy Amazon one that came with really crappy dies. Honestly, the ones that come from Amazon that are for the non-insulated terminals, they're garbage. They're total trash. All the other ones are usable, but the dies are interchangeable, so that way I don't have to constantly switch between the two. That's why I have one crappy one and one good one. For the insulated connectors that are just crimped with just a straight rectangle, it literally doesn't matter. There's no way to screw it up. So those dies are okay. It's the ones that are for the non-insulated terminals that you need to have the really nice ones from someone like Paladin or something like that, because otherwise it's trash. I mean, the crimps come out like crap. I mean, it's not a tool snobbery thing. It's like I've tried and they come out like garbage. So your mileage may vary, but the ones that I've gotten from Amazon for non-insulated terminals are shit. So that being said, you take some wire, you go ahead, you identify the circuit. In this case, as the example, I'm going to use wire number 1, which goes with wire number 13, both of which correspond to the intake air temperature sensor. So I'll start, at the end over here of my template of the old harness, and I'll run a section of wire out to, where that sensor terminates, and then I'll clip it there. So that's what I do. I'll repeat that for number 13, and then I'll put wire numbers on both of those at both ends before I insert them into this big connector here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then you guys will see it all sped up on the B-roll. So yeah, see you later.
So here are my stickers, 1 and 13.
So now you just go ahead and put these pins into the appropriate holes here. Again, number 1 is going to be A, so we just go ahead and take number 1, which I've already marked, and I go ahead and stick it into the center here, which is A. And then number 13, according to the chart, is M. So I'm going to go ahead and find M, as in Mary. There it is, off to the side there. So I'll put it there. And I've already gone ahead and shrinked this end of it, leaving myself a good amount on the end so that I can trim some back. If I need to add some additional to cover it, I'll just add another little piece here. And so it's, off camera there. So you'll see I loomed it so that I left a little bit here, enough so that I can move the numbers and trim it back if I want to at the end, if it's too long. And if this is the right length, then I'll just put another little piece of shrink tube at the end here. And it actually helps to finish off this end so that there's some flex here at the end, but it doesn't make this part loosen up. So it keeps things nice and tight. So good thing to do it this way. And you can see here that I only did it for about as long as I need to. I didn't do it for the whole length because it's going to go into a bigger bundle later. Off screen, I finished running all of the wires with their lengths according to my template. Pinning, crimping on the pins at this end here, and putting them in one at a time following the same chart as at the opposite end. So that's all pretty straightforward. Off screen, the piece of it that perhaps you might want to know more about what I did is this sheathing here. I took the shrink tube, one piece that runs from about there to there, and slid it over the wires and then shrunk it. And then I got a piece of bigger shrink tubing and just a short length of it and slipped that over here in order to give it like a little bit of a more flexible little thing. And that's just cosmetic. It doesn't do anything. The sealing is all done by the rubber or the silicone seal there that's inside the connector. So this doesn't do anything. It's just cosmetic. And then over here, you'll see that I've started by shrink tubing another section here, and I'm breaking out the branches according again to my template. So I'm just following the exact same breakout lengths and separation distances, making sure to give myself a bit of extra length on each one of these branches so that I can trim things and route things a little bit easier in the engine bay without pinching stuff. So I always like to give myself an extra inch or two on each one of these just to make it easier when I'm routing stuff in the engine compartment. Yeah, other than that, you just keep on trucking through the rest of this harness. So I'm going to keep on going. One thing to keep in mind is that there are grounds that you'll run at this point that you didn't have before, because some of the grounds don't go to the ECU. They're just buried inside the harness and go to different places. So you'll want to be very careful to add any of those grounds as you start looming and shrink tubing this. One of these ground, and again, it depends on the year, so I'm not going to cover every single one here, but you just have to follow the schematic. So if you have like a late model, for example, like this one, it's an E fuel injection system. It has an extra ground that goes from where the mass air pressure sensor is, and it terminates over by where the distributor is. And it's just meant to help equalize the grounds between where the pressure sensor is mounted, which is on the body of the car, and where the other sensors are, which is on the engine of the car. And so that's why this ground was added. So there's other grounds like that, and it's depending on the year and version and all other stuff. So you just want to make sure that you don't miss these. Here's a quick example of how I do the grounds for the injectors. So I have the two hot wires that come from the ECU, the signal wires that come from the ECU. Once I start looming the lower part of the harness and I get to the first branch that goes off to the injectors, I go ahead and I add my two ground wires. Then I loom those together as one branch so that I have the lengths set here. I can trim them, even and whatever when I pin them, or add the connectors is what I mean by that. And then And then I'll have these two dangling grounds here that are now, they're already measured out to the length of where the other grounds will terminate, but they're going to run inside the harness alongside these other wires. But these don't run up to the ECU at all, so you have to add these as you're looming the bottom side. So you'll have to do this again for the other branch of injectors. You have to add one for the throttle position sensor. You have to add one for your cold start, and then run a hot from the starter connector to the cold start. So there's some stuff that doubles back inside of these harnesses you have to pay attention to. But this is how I do this. I'll end up, pairing these off into their own little, segments, and then looming over the entire thing to make it look pretty. But that's how I do this. Another thing to note is in the very early harnesses, the ground wires don't go all the way to a common termination point. They just sort of double back on themselves and have a little pigtail with a common spade connector that connects near where the injectors are. So you don't have to have all this extra wire on the early models. It's only on the lates. So once you have most of the branches, and I say like, I don't know, everything except for maybe the cold start done, on a late model. Once you have all those branches broken out and loomed, now it's starting to look like a harness, and you're going to start prettying things up and making sure that you have covered all of the breakouts for those branches, right? So like here's my power and my mass air pressure sensor and the ground, and then here's the branch for the throttle position, or sorry, the throttle, the two injectors, and then the next branch after that's going to be your fuel pump and your distributor contacts and some stuff like that. So once you have all that done, now you're going to take these bigger, wider pieces, and you're going to cut small segments, maybe about, as long as your thumb or so, maybe a little longer, and slide those up, much like I have with this one, and slide it over these junctions so that it like binds them all together. And that way those will be your segmented breakouts, as you go along. So that's what you're going to do, and we'll show you the end result here in a second. Okay, off camera, I've slid this, index finger length piece of shrink tube, same size as what I loomed the main trunk of this with, over everything. So off camera, I'd slid that over. And now I'm going to slide it back over these junctions like this. You're going to cover this all up. So what you want to do is get it so that you're covering, a good amount on both sides, so that this is more or less in the middle of this. The idea being that when people, go to plug things in and move these branches over time and stuff, that you don't end up exposing these wires. So that's the idea here. Some people can, choose to put sealant or glue here. I think that's overkill, but you can go ahead and do whatever you want here. After you're done shrink tubing, that's what it should look like. And then you'll have your wires breaking out from there, and it'll look just like in the original harness did. So now we'll do this one. Okay, a quick note about cold starts on the late models. Obviously the early ones, it was like a separate, jumper harness and relay and all that other stuff, so you have to follow the manual on that. But the late models had an included cold start. The way that circuit works, because, and I'll explain because the book sometimes is a little bit convoluted on this, is you have a wire that is running in parallel with the number 18 starter wire in the harness. And that wire doubles back into the harness. Hard to see there, but it doubles back into the harness, and then it will break out again to your cold start injector. And then I will add a ground wire to this hot wire, so that there'll be two of them, with one plug that goes in the cold start injector, and then that ground will terminate at your thermotime switch. So that's the circuit for the cold start. It's pretty simple. You just add an extra wire to the number 18, and then where you terminate that cold start extra wire, then you add a ground. That's for your thermotime switch. And again, you'll follow the lengths that are in your harness. So this should be pretty straightforward, but to save you some time from dissecting it and figuring it out, that's how the cold start is wired up. All right, so now we've finished all of the main shrink tubing and looming. There's still a little teeny bit left to do, mostly on the ends, at the very ends, where we're going to finish putting on the boots and trimming things back and connecting the, the crimping on the connectors for these ends and stuff. But all of the main trunk, the main body, all of it is done. All of the covers for like the breakouts are done. So you can see how those turned out. I put one here at the end as well where everything breaks out to various different, sensors and stuff. So here's a good example of trimming. So let me show you guys. Here's where did that injector guy go? Here it is. So I have these 4 wires, 2 hot or 2 signal wires for the injectors, and then the 2 grounds, but I left the grounds pretty long here. So you can see there's a significant amount of extra on the grounds there. So what I'm going to do is finish looming this end, breaking them out into their respective pairs for each injector, moving these labels back so that they're even with the other ones, and then trim these wires so that everything is the same length. I know that the injector wires are very close to the exact length that I need, so I left the grounds long because they were just those loose ones you add. So now I trim them back now that everything is shrink tubed, and any slack that I might have needed to double back or anything like that has been taken up. So now it's safe for me to trim these back. Those grounds all terminate together here, and you can see that while I was doing this, I was pairing them off. There are 3 pairs of grounds, and they're all about the same length. I've trimmed them back more or less the same length. Number 11 is my guiding star. This is the one that comes from the ECU. It's, to me, the most important ground. And this is what I use as sort of my length measurement. So as long as they're all longer than that, I know I've left myself enough slack. This is the one that I use to approximate the real length that I need. So you can see there, all of the other ones are longer than that one. So I'll trim those back so that they're even, and then put one last little bit of shrink tubing and stuff over this, but this is almost done. So then we'll start putting on the boots and the crimped on end connectors. And that's just a matter of sliding the boot on, stripping off the ends of these wires, crimping on the spade connectors, putting on the plastic housing, and then sliding the boot back to cover the plastic housing. Might be a good time for me to plug my plugs. These are my 3D printed D-Jet plugs that I have made on a industrial aerospace quality HP 3D printer. This plastic should hold up to engine bay conditions and oil and a lot of other stuff. My thought process behind that is that a lot of these that are OEM ones, let's see if this will focus on it. Come on. There we go. You can see this one's kind of chipped there. They get really brittle with age and they start cracking and coming apart, especially if you remove the old pins, put in new ones and stuff. And so once they start doing that, it's kind of sketchy to reuse them. So that's why I had these 3D printed ones designed and made, so that we can use fresh ones whenever we break one, or one of them is too damaged to reuse or dirty or whatever. So here's that injector branch all cleaned up. You can see I paired off the ground with the sensor wire and made it so that each one has enough room to back the boots up onto, and then bridged it with this piece here to clean everything up. All right, so I've trimmed back all my wires, everything's ready to go, and then off camera, I've gone ahead and I've done all the regular connectors. So like all the regular spade connectors, you can do plain old spades, you can do spades with little covers, you can do bare ones. It's kind of up to you what you want to do here, but make sure that you match the ends with what they have to hook up to, obviously. Different years will have variations on this, so just pay attention to what you have. Don't necessarily copy exactly what I have here. This is for a late model, for like a 72, 73 type of car. So yeah, so basically I've gone through and I've created all of my regular connectors. They're finished. So now I'm going to finally get around to the D-Jet ones. And so everything's trimmed and ready to go. All I'm going to do is put on the boots and then start trimming and crimping connectors. It's pretty straightforward, just like everything else. The only difference is that now, instead of these typical spade connectors that you can buy pretty much anywhere, I'll be using these ones that are a specific worth part number and focus, piece, there we go. And it's got these little locking tabs that are pretty much impossible to see with the camera. Let me see if I can focus on it somehow. Come on. Come on. Focus. It's really hard, but you can kind of see it there. There's a little tab, locking tab that sticks up. That's the important piece because that's what holds them inside of the plastic housings. So yeah, so then any ones, obviously if you're not buying these from me or you're not getting them somehow or printing them yourself another way, then what you're going to end up doing is taking the old ones and watch my video on that. You can depin them from the original harness and then you can clean them, assuming that they're not all broken. And you can do that with like, you know, these little brushes for like cleaning gun parts and stuff like that. So these will work. Okay, so here's one that's finished. You can see I used one of the 3D printed connectors, but I'm going to use some cleaned up other ones for some other ones here. And I've gone ahead and left this one disassembled here so I can show you how it's done. So you strip off the wires and you do that however you prefer. And then using your crimper, you crimp on these small tabbed connectors, okay? And then you take your plastic housing and you make sure that you pay attention to the orientation of the wires in the order in which they go inside the connector. Now, in my template here, I had gone through and documented all the different variations and what order the numbers go into and stuff like that. You can see here I've marked how it looks, and my reference is that I always look at the connector head on. So when I insert them, the order of the numbers corresponds to this orientation as I look at the plug, you know, the way you would at the end of a parts harness, right? So that's the way that I've done it, but you guys can do it any way that you want that makes sense to you. It helps to write down as a chart or whatever. It definitely helps to have your old harness there handy so that you can see exactly which wire goes in which port. Some of the components in the car, like the trigger contacts and the mass air pressure sensor and the throttle position sensor and stuff, they'll have it marked on the part, which pin corresponds to which wire, which number. So you can verify or validate against that if you want. All you have to do is either have those on those parts on the bench in front of you, which I used to do just to keep my sanity checked, or you can you know, insert the wires into the plug and then put it up against the connector and verify, okay, on the right I've got number, you know, 5, and on the left I've got number 26, and that corresponds with what's on the sensor. I'm just throwing numbers out there. It's not a real thing, but you follow me. You can pick any connector and put it up against its sensor and see that your wire's in the correct order. So that's the most important thing. Follow the schematics, follow your old harness. But once you have this prepped, where did my branch go? Here it is. Once you have your branch, you just go ahead and insert it such that these locking tabs go into these small slots there, the little tiny slots at the top. So you insert the wires and then you make sure that you have your boot on first. So you put all your boots on first so that when you put the connector on, then you put the boot on top of it. You will not be able to put the boot on after the connector, so make sure that you do it in this order.